Welcome to the second TBC workshop, Tech by Choice workshop. We're doing here today on building websites with React and Firebase. Our last workshop was somebody remind me, it was on site reliability, right? Yeah, and it was hosted by our Amy Toby, and she does a great job at kind of going through a really important job in the industry. So I definitely recommend you check that out. Today, though, we're gonna build a little application or a little website using React, using Firebase, and a lot of the different applications that I use every day. I'm going to be using a Mac to build my website. If you don't have a Mac, or if you have a Windows or a Linux computer, definitely, sorry, I'll definitely send instructions after this video, or I'll send you the YouTube video for this workshop, and it'll include kind of all of the instructions for Windows, for Linux, all that kind of stuff. So before we get started, I'll tell you all a little bit about myself. My name is Emanuel Herrero. I'm from Puerto Rico. I've been building websites now for about 9 years. I like to say that I got my start in high school building MySpace websites. I mean, I don't know, MySpace pages, and getting fancy with HTML and CSS. And turns out you could definitely work down that path to build a career for yourself. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I've been building real estate websites. I've been building e-commerce websites, lead capture pages, et cetera, et cetera. Really excited about what I do generally. But yeah, so today the topic here is building your own website, right? And I like to say that the first thing that you kind of need before you set off on building this great website is a goal, right? It might be that you are you're in a school club, or you could be I don't know, in a community, and you kind of want to bring your community together, and you want to give them some tools to kind of have something to do on your website, right? But I like to say that having a goal is just the first step, right? Just write it down. What do you want your website to do? It could be a very simple poll. It could be you're starting a new business and you kind of want to gauge interest, so you're going to collect emails, which is kind of the example that we're going to do today. But yeah, generally, let me start the screen share. Can everybody see my screen? Awesome. Perfect. Cool. By the way, if you haven't yet taken this survey, I'm going to drop it in the chat real quick. It's just going to help us, have better workshops in the future, and kind of tone our content. But so let me show you kind of what we're going to be building here today. I'm also going to drop this link in the Zoom chat, so check that out. You should be able to open it on your computers, phones, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe don't give me a real email, throw a fake email in there. But yeah, generally, it's just, I had this idea, right? I was playing Beat Saber the other day. If you're not familiar, it's a game on VR. You're like slashing around different little blocks that are coming at you to some music, right? It's super fun. It's a nice little workout, and me and my partner love playing it. The issue is that I get very sweaty, right? I'll just show this purely for context. Very, very sweaty person, very, very sweaty face, and this kind of this harshes the experience for my partner, right? She wants to play Beat Saber. She doesn't necessarily want to enjoy my sweat. So my idea was, all right, let's build this little thing that we can add to the Oculus, where it's going to just catch all my sweat, so that instead of you experiencing my sweat, you're experiencing what Oculus has to give, right? So before I go out and figure out this thing, right, I'm just going to build a nice simple website to gather interest, right? To gather emails, to see who would be interested in this. And I know that this website is pretty simple, but just a little plug that this Thursday I'm giving the part 2 of this talk, which is going to cover making this a lot prettier. But yeah, so the goal of our website is really just to collect emails. So let me test that it's doing that. This email.com. Get notified. Awesome. Now, if I go to the database that I've set up for my website, I can see that email, oh, maybe I should refresh this. Sort this by created at. I can see that the email that I just, this email, somebody else did an email. This email is stored in my database, right? So now in the future, I can count how many leads I've gotten from my website. I can see what emails I could send these people an email whenever I finally choose to release my product, right? So just to get started here, the first thing I'm going to have to do is either install Node, right? Let me get that link. Install Node on my computer. Let me drop this in the chat. I'm not going to go. You should definitely download the recommended for most users. I'm not going to go through with this. My computer has Node already, but this should be a fairly straightforward installation. Then after I've installed Node, I need to open a terminal. On Mac, it's just terminal, and I'm going to press Command space here, which brings up Spotlight, and then type terminal. Then the first thing that should come up is this application called terminal. On Windows, you could do something similar. I believe you press or you go to Start, then you search for your applications, and it should be called either PowerShell or Command Prompt, one of those two. So after I've installed Node, I can just verify real quick, and let me make this a lot bigger. So I can just verify that I've installed Node. And here I'm just running a command at my computer. I'm telling it to do something, right? And I'm using the language that it understands. It understands these commands. After I install Node on my computer, my computer learns this Node command, right? The Node command also comes with a couple different commands. One of them, the more important one, being npx. And what npx is going to do is basically let me run any kind of command that is stored in npm, but without kind of having to install it on my computer. So I'm going to go ahead, and the command that I need to use is create React app. And what create React app is, it's a starter. It's a scaffold, right? It's what we call the scaffold. It's a thing that kind of sets up everything that I need to build my application, right? So I'm going to name my application TUC Oculus. I don't want that. Sweat catcher. When I hit enter, this is going to execute a whole bunch of, how do I disable Siri? A whole bunch of different commands, different stuff. I personally don't even know what all of the things it's doing in the background are, but once it goes through everything, in 3, 2, 1. Awesome. It says everything happened successfully, right? We created a directory in our computer with all of the different files that we need in order to create an application, right? Here it's giving us a real helpful suggestion to kind of cd into our new folder or new directory. CD stands for change directory. Somebody please correct me if that's not the right one. And then it's telling us to run this yarn start command. Now, if you just installed Node, you might not be able to run yarn start because you might not have it on your computer yet. What I would say is that you could run this command, npm install -g for globally yarn. And executing that command should get you to this point. I'll also say that if you're following along and you fall behind, we're recording this. We're going to share this as soon as it's ready, probably like minutes after this is done. So you definitely follow along again, kind of pause it and go at your own speed. So I'm going to run this yarn start command that create React tab told me to run. And what this is now doing is it's kind of booting up a server, right? It's a thing that's going to serve my web pages. Not only that, it's also going to do a whole lot of cool stuff in the background so that while I'm working, it's going to give me a really great development experience, right? When I make a change to my code, I'm going to be able to see those changes pretty immediately, right? So starting the development server is, I don't know why in this last version of Create React App taking its sweet time. But before we start to edit our code, right, we need a code editor. There are so many different code editors, but the one that I really like using for JavaScript development, for React development, it's called VS Code, Visual Studio Code. It's made by Microsoft. I think they make pretty cool stuff. I would definitely just recommend kind of running with this. I think the features that it adds to JavaScript development are pretty invaluable. So I'm just going to drop this in the chat real quick. There we go. Now I already have VS Code installed on my computer, so let me just boot it up real quick. Now, once I've opened VS Code, I need to basically find that folder that I just created, right? In your terminal, if you're on Windows, from the directory that you created, you could press open dot to bring up a Finder window with that directory. Or if you just know kind of where this was created, which in my case would be like the root directory of my computer, you can just grab this little folder and drop it into VS Code. And here we go. Now we get to see all of our code and our code in all its glory. So the files here on the left is basically everything that command, that create React app command created for us, right? So it created this public directory, which has all of these different files inside it, logo, PNG, a lot of this stuff you'd want to edit before you launch your website. We're going to kind of forgo that for now. And this index.html file is a little peculiar. So if you've ever built a website before, or if you have a good understanding of HTML, you kind of understand that every web page you go to is an HTML page, right? You're following these template tags and documenting the structure of what you're seeing on the page. So the peculiar thing about our application is that our index page is pretty empty. It just has this div element with an ID of root, and it doesn't have much in terms of content or links or anything like that. And the reason behind this is because React is kind of, you know, just in the background compiling our entire application together and just efficiently building this index HTML page. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But, you know, the first thing that I definitely want to change is I don't want the title for my website to be React app. So I'm gonna name this Oculus Webcatcher. And I'm gonna hit Command Save or Command S. I think on Windows it'd be Control S to save. And now I can go into, I'm gonna ignore these files for right now. If y'all want to kind of talk about these, all of the other files that we're creating right now, definitely we can have a little Q&A at the end of this talk. But inside our source folder, we have a variety of different JavaScript files. You can tell it's a JavaScript file because it ends with a .js on it, and CSS files. Again, CSS, awesome language that we're going to cover next Thursday. What we kind of have to understand for these two is that JavaScript and React can do a lot of really cool things. So what React is helping us do right now is it's helping us through two things, through giving us a templating language called JSX. And I'm not going to go too far into the weeds for what JSX is, but on a very top level, it's a templating language, much like HTML, that allows us to use JavaScript to do really powerful things. Kind of, you know, you can kind of see that right here, where if you're familiar with HTML, this starts looking a little bit weird, where we're passing a variable to the source of this image instead of a string. That would be an address, kind of like this. But, you know, we kind of, oh, sorry. Let's finally open up. And this app.js file, which I am going to keep up here and bring this page over, is what you should be seeing when, if you ran yarn start and that development server that we were running was doing its awesome, cool stuff, you should have gotten this message saying, hey, compiled successfully. And if it didn't open it up automatically, you should be able to, in your favorite browser, Safari, Chrome, go to this address, http://localhost:3000, which will pull up this little page. And what you should understand about this page right now is that it's running on your computer, right? If I were to give this to a friend of mine, to y'all would not be able to see anything because, you know, you don't have access to my local host, which is a very cool and safe and secure thing. But, you know, later in this workshop, we'll go into kind of how do I make this a thing that everybody else can kind of come and see. So just kind of want to really quickly show you why we're using Create React, right? So just really quickly, if I want to see some changes, I could just save my file, and in less than a second, React takes all of my changes, compiles a whole new application, and shows me my updates, right? So this isn't too useful for my application or for my purposes, seeing that, you know, I can't really even collect an email through this or anything like that. So what I need to do right now is kind of get rid of all this code and delete, right? And now I'm going to kind of start building the structure of my page, right? So I'm going to open a main element. And right now I am basically only writing HTML. And let me grab a super useful link here. Simple HTML, right? And the thing that I need to be careful with when I am writing HTML is that I'm using the semantic tags, which just says, you know, if it's a header, it should have its appropriate tag. If it's a collection of items, kind of like you know, at the top of this page, you see this MDN logo with the search bar. This would actually be the header of the page, right? It contains navigation items. H1s, H2s, those are actual titles in your page. Sections, there's a lot of different elements. You should get very familiar with them. You should understand kind of the purpose for them. And the reason behind really understanding the purpose for these elements is that, you know, when we are seeing a web page, which right now, if I just write a very simple title, we're literally just, you know, seeing the page, right? But when people who can't necessarily see a web page and use the web through screen readers or other assistance tools, they rely on that structure that you're creating, right? So at the end of the day, we kind of have to understand that the HTML we're writing is a structure of our page, right? The way that we structure our content. So in that same vein, I am going to, 1 second. I am going to write a header component. I'm going to write the title for my page. And now I'm going to open up a section. And then in this section, I'm cheating and kind of seeing the content over here. I'm going to use an H2 to kind of give this section a new definition. Open a new paragraph. Let me share that link real quick. There we go. All right, and then when I save my changes, I should see everything I just wrote. Awesome. So now the thing that the whole goal for my website is that I need to collect emails, right? And so far, I haven't written anything that does anything to do that. So I'm going to open up the form element. It's kind of one of the atomic components of web design, right? You're generally looking at this design pattern a lot, where you have a form that collects some data and then does something with that data, right? So my form is going to require a label. This label is going to say your email. Then I'm going to use an input element, which doesn't have any children, so I can just close it by itself, right? Using this notation here. And now an input has a series of properties. Oh, give me 1 second. Oh, Sam, I just want to address that command. I'm using VS Code with a couple of different plugins, which I'll definitely go into a little bit more detail over. But VS Code just out of the box definitely includes a lot of these different tools that will like speed up a lot of the development. But okay, so the input element has a lot of different properties that I get to pass it to kind of declare what kind of input this is, right? It's not just a simple input. It's an input that has a type of email, right? And the reason that I do this is so that, you know, if I were to write something here on this page and say enter to submit my form, whatever browser you're using will probably already give you an error that says, hey, you should write something that looks like an email on this input. So one of the things that I do to kind of figure out like what properties could I pass these elements is with VS Code, I can hold command or control. I hold command on Mac. You might have to hold control on a Windows. And then I hover over this input that I created. And then when I click on it, it's going to pull up this really long type file. This is actually not even what I'm looking for. Maybe it's, I click on type. I'm not going to go into what TypeScript is, but TypeScript is basically a way to define all of the different properties that this input has, right? A better solution would probably be to do what I do whenever I'm thinking about like what can I do with an input. I type MDN, I type HTML, and then I type input. And then the first thing that comes up is Mozilla's documentation on HTML. MDN, my favorite place to get documentation. Here you can learn all about inputs, learn all about the different input types, all the different properties that you could pass in an input. And you could see that you could have text, tel for a telephone, search to denote that this input is going to search over some data set, password, which will make sure that whatever you type into the input is these little dots. Don't give away your password. A number so that you're only should be the only thing you can type as a number. I don't know why they let me type words in there. But all right, so I need that input type email, and then I'm going to use another input. This time it's called a submit input. So input type submit. When I go to my page, I should see this new submit button just appeared there. And I don't want it to say submit, but I also, just because it's an input, I don't want to pass it a child. So what I could actually do is use this value property in the input to say that the value of this input should be, what's my get notified. If I save this, I should see that the text, let me make this page bigger too, that the text of this button just updated to get notified. Awesome. So now let me just try out my page. If I click on get notified, my email just disappeared, but nothing really happened, right? This email kind of just disappeared into the ether, but this form was submitted. This, I basically know this from years of kind of building form components, but the default action of a form when you submit that form, right? And here, because our structure declares that this form, when you click on this input of type submit, that's what's going to submit our form. Also, hitting enter on any of the inputs in our form will also trigger that submit. It has a default action of basically taking that data and sending it somewhere, right? And usually you could have done this by passing an action with some URL, so like, facebook.com, for example. But what we actually want to do is we want to change the default behavior of our form. The way that we would do this is by kind of using a built-in event that is triggered when the form submits, and that in this React component, which if you're familiar with HTML and like traditional JavaScript, this would be like on submit all lowercase. The way that we do it in React is that we would say on submit. Now on submit accepts a method. Now, just to have a little refresher. A method in JavaScript, right, is just the function that I'm declaring. I'm going to name this function handle submit. And when this form element calls on submit, right, because I've clicked submit, and this onSubmit method is going to get, executed, right? The form is actually going to pass this object to the function I give it. So if I'm saying that when this form is submitted, it should execute handle submit. I know that on submit, I don't want to go too far into this. I know that on submit is going to give me that object. I'm going to call this form submit. And if I console log this form submit, and just real quick, because I know that this object that's getting passed to my method has a method itself called prevent default. I want to call that so that when I submit my email, it doesn't just disappear into the ether. It actually does something with that email. So I'm going to save my changes. I don't see any changes on my page because I didn't really change any of the underlying content. But I'm going to press Command Option I. And if you're using Safari like me, you might have to go into settings and then enable developer mode. But you're probably using Chrome, right? So you could actually just right-click on any element on the page and click this inspect element. That comes up. Then what you're going to want to go and find is your console, or just this. I think by clicking escape, it should kind of come up. Should come up for you. So what I'm looking for is that when I type this email, I want to see what that event that gets passed. And in my console, I could see that my handle submit function was called with that object that the form passes. And this is all of the different methods or properties in that parameter that the form is passing us. So you could see here the prevent default. Where is it? Prevent default right here. This method can't get called, like that. But so what I actually want to happen here is that when this email when this form is submitted, right? I want to collect this email and do something with it. But I don't really know. My code has no idea what the email that the person typed in was, right? So what I need to do now is this concept in React of turning this input from an uncontrolled input to a controlled input. So what that basically means is you see this value here that we're giving to our input type submit that says get notified. Well, our input type email also accepts a value. And I could say value equals email. When I save that, I'll see that whenever I refresh the page, the value of this input is always going to be some email.com. And I can't change this. I can't delete this. Nothing I do will change this because this value is hard-coded to this input. Now, that's not really what I, anything that would be too useful right now. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to the very top of my file where I see this import React from React. And the reason we're doing this is so that we can write all of this awesome JSX and let React handle it for us. But I am going to edit this import declaration to additionally import a method from the React library called useState. Now, what this method is going to allow me to do is give this component or this function app that we're building here a little bit of memory, right? So the way that, and again, all of these different parts of React are very well documented in react.js.org. I have all of the individual like the links for the documentation for properties, the documentation for use state, all that kind of stuff, and we'll send it to y'all. But what we basically need to know is that use state is a function similar to this handle submit function that we created, but it's coming from the React library, right? And what we also need to know is that the use state function, when called, so I would recommend maybe just, I know it's not super exciting just to watch and not do that at the same time, but we are definitely recording this, so if you're stuck, you'll absolutely have a chance to kind of follow along again to get it working on your machine. So use state returns two parameters. It returns the current state, so the current value, right? So as its first parameter that it returns. So, and I'm going to name that email for me, and I'm going to initialize this use state call with an empty string. So that email is currently just an empty string. And now I'm going to change the value of my input type email to a variable called email. That's actually just coming from, let me minimize some of this code here. This email that's actually coming from this declaration here of use state. So the really cool thing about use state is that it also returns a method to update that email and following the conventions that React asks us to follow, because they're doing some really awesome stuff in the background. We want to basically call this set plus whatever you named the initial variable. Now I'm also using this, I think you may have noticed I'm using camel case, which basically just means if you have two words, you put them together and you capitalize the second word or third word, fourth word, so on and so forth. So this set email is basically a function that I could call at any time to change the value of email. So let me save this page. Now we see that email is empty, right? And I still can't type, do anything to really kind of change this form or anything. Give me just 1 second here. Okay. So what I need to do to kind of change this is, much like form has an onSubmit property that accepts a method, I know that input also has a property called onChange that will be called whenever the user types anything on this field. Now it's going to also accept a parameter. I actually don't want to write like a function. I want to use an arrow function, which is a part of ES6, which is definitely something that I can go into a lot of detail later on. But basically, it's a different way to define a method. So instead of saying using the keyword function, we're instead just using the parameter, and we're using a fat arrow to say it returns this function. So I'm going to say that the parameter is called input change. I'm going to use this fat arrow, which is just colon plus a less than. So do like this. That's a fat arrow. And what I want to happen here is that when this onChange method is executed, I want to call my set email to input change. Now, input change is an object that isn't necessarily the value that we're looking for, right? So again, I could use that trick because I declared my function this way. I could use that trick I talked about earlier, where I just click on a word and it'll take me to its type declaration. Oh, I can't do that here. Can't. Or I could kind of see the documentation, but again, this will be super useful later if you don't have like much better documentation to read. Okay, so I know that input change basically, and actually let's just console log this because this would be how if I don't know it necessarily and I don't want to look at the documentation, I want to get a console log of what input change looks like. So now I saved my file, and my changes should have updated to this page. So if I just click on this input and I try to change it, nothing is happening because I'm still not doing anything with that change. But if I check my console, I can check that I can see that all of these, we're printing all of these different objects that are getting passed as an input change, right? So I basically know that if I want to know what the current change that happened was, I kind of need to use this notation. So I'm looking at the current target property of this property that gets passed to our function. And again, by the way, this could be anything that you name it, right? I could, instead of input change, say I wanted to just name this E. That would also work. That would just be fine. What I would say is that you generally want to be, this is kind of the hardest, I think it's the hardest part of development. It's finding really good names for your variables and your methods, so that when you read your code again, you get a much better idea of kind of how to follow along your own code. So I'm going to say that when this input changes, I need to set email to the input change, right, target value. So I'll save this. And now I can see that when I actually type an email here, I can see my changes again. And what's happening here is that every single time I make a change, so I press down on my keyboard, this input is executing this onChange method that it has. And because I passed it a specific method to execute, I changed the default behavior of this input to execute set email on the current change that happened. Now I can finally set that state to the email that I want, right? So now that I'm actually setting the state to the email that I want, nothing is happening, right? So what I actually want to happen is that when the form is submitted, when handle submit happens, right? Instead of just kind of showing nothing, I want to do something with that email, but I also want to show you a thank you page, right? So the first thing I kind of want to do, and this is a little bit backwards, but it kind of shows it shows you the one of the really powerful things from React, which is components, and it's that everything is a component that you could build yourself, right? So much like you're using default HTML5 elements, you could also use React components alongside these elements. So I'm going to teach you how to make a reusable component because I want to show you a whole different page, but every single page on this website is going to have this title, this header element, and because I don't want to copy that over and over again, I am going to, let me make this a little bigger. And I click on this file explorer here. So once you can see your different files, make sure that you're inside this source directory. src directory. So click on maybe app.js, and then click on this new file icon here. And I'm going to name this new file header.js. Now, this is a brand new JavaScript file in my directory. And because it's a React component, I need to do what I do with every React component, and it's import React from React at the very top of the file. And now, much like this function app is declared, I'm going to declare a function header. And notice that this is capitalized, much like app is capitalized. And that's because React wants us to have a distinction between a plain HTML element and a component that we're building. So this component is basically just going to return this header that we created earlier. I'm going to click on save here. And now we're not doing anything with this header function. So we need to export it. So export, I'm going to use the keyword default header. And now what this is saying is that from this src header.js file, I want to export this component that I created. So now that if I save both of these files and I refresh my page, right, you can see that that title no longer exists, right? Because I removed it from my JavaScript element. So it's a little nicer. So just like we're importing React from React, what we can do now is import header from, and this is relative to the file we're on, right? Header. And what I'm saying here is that from this header file that we're declaring in our source folder, I need you to import the default component that we're exporting from there, right? Which is this header component. And now that I've imported that component in my page, I can just here under main, kind of this in the same place where that older declaration was, add this header component, save my page, we have our title back. And the reason we did that was because I want to create a thank you page. So I'm going to close this header.js file and make sure that I'm in my src folder again, just clicking on src, hitting the new file button again, and I'm going to create a thank you page. .js, very important. Again, because this is a React file, I also know that I'm going to use that header. So I'm going to import that header from header. Now I'm creating that component. I'm just going to go ahead because I know that I'm exporting it. Just go ahead and export it. Now, my thank you page is just going to be, it's going to return a very simple page. Open up its own main element. Inside that main element, I want that header that we've created. Under that, I just want to open up a section. It's going to have a title of thank you for your interests. And notice that I'm using H2 because I know that header includes an H1. And just to be semantic and to keep my page very accessible, I want to make sure that I don't have like repeating elements. So I don't want like an H1, H1, H1. I want H1, H2, H3, H4. So thank you for your interest. Maybe just single interest. And I'm going to open up a little paragraph and say, I've gone ahead and created this page now, and I can close this file. It'll still be alive, right? But we can't see this page anywhere in the application that we're building, right? So I'm going to show you how basically using JavaScript, so just default JavaScript, I can say that, you know, I want to return a whole different component instead of this kind of default content that we're returning from our application currently. So I'm going to use that useState method again. And this time I am going to say that there's going to be a new piece of state called did sign up. And again, because we're following that convention from React, I'm going to name the setter or the method that updates did sign up to set did sign up. And I'm going to call useState with a default parameter of false. There's a Boolean, right? So it could be either false or true. So now what I want to do with did sign up, I don't want to like use anything in my current content. I want to say that before my application returns this content, I want to run a check. I want to say that if did sign up is true, and by default, on an if statement, if the condition that you pass is true, it'll execute automatic. So this I don't actually have to say equals true. I could just say that if did sign up is true, I want my app component to return this thank you page instead. Now this is all red because I haven't imported it yet. But the same way that I imported this header, I'm going to import thank you page from thank you page. And now, before I save my change, I want to make sure that I see that thank you page. So I'm going to kind of have, you know, use the expected method here and say that when my form is submitted and this handle submit function is called, I want to call set did sign up to true. I've saved my changes. Now, if I go back to this email form, I could write an email. And when I submit these changes, I could see my thank you page. And the reason that happened was when I submitted my form, this handle submit this handle submit method that I've created gets called, and then set did sign up gets called, and it changes the value of did sign up to true. So now when my application component renders or is printed or painted on the page, instead of returning all of this content, we are returning the thank you page that we created. So that's pretty awesome and cool, right? We're showing two different pages. We are currently collecting an email that the form submits. But right now, this email is still not going anywhere, right? It's still just in the ether. It lives in this page's memory for a second, and then as soon as you refresh this page, it's gone. So now what I want to show you is how I can use the same page and add a little bit of back-end magic. And what I'm going to use for that is a Google product called Firebase. And if you've never set up Firebase, this is definitely where you might get a little hung up. But for Firebase, you have to be logged into your Google account, right? And once you do, you can create a new project. I'm going to name this Sweatiest Oculus. And I go just through the normal steps of creating this project. I am going to configure Google Analytics because I want to find out, what what kind of data I'm getting here. So this should take a couple of seconds, and then it should give us the instructions that we need. And again, this is an overview of all these different tools, just to show you kind of the reality that what's stopping you between what's keeping you from putting up a website is just an afternoon's time, right? You could go through this and really kind of create whatever kind of pages you'd like once you know your basics. So once I've created this project, right? I need to add my actual application. So it's a web app. Firebase is really cool because it gives you like a serverless backend for native applications as well as the web. I'll go into why that's awesome later. I'm just going to name this web app. I do want to set up Firebase hosting for this application. I'm going to register my application. And then it's going to tell me that I need to add this Firebase SDK to my application, which I definitely want to do because I'm going to use it as a database. These aren't necessarily the instructions that you're going to follow. And again, I'll send a document after this video detailing that, but or you check the video description below if I know the future. I'm going to go to this get started link here. And under step 3, I can see that instead of from hosting URLs, I could use this using module bundlers option. Now, I'm going to go back to my terminal, and I'm pressing Command N on Windows. It might be like Control Tab. You might actually just have to open a brand new one. I'm hitting Command N to open up a new terminal inside that same directory I was at. And I'm actually not going to follow these npm commands because I'm using Yarn, and if you're also using Yarn, then you should use Yarn commands this way. You might actually have to use npm commands if you're using npm. So now what I want to do is I want to tell my project that I'm going to use this Firebase package. So when I use the command yarn space add space Firebase, hit enter, what I'm actually doing is I'm telling Yarn to hey, this project, this application, this website that I am building has this dependency of Firebase. Could you go fetch all of its awesome code and put it in my project? And Yarn says, I gotcha. So once I have added Yarn to my project, I can actually initialize Firebase in my project. Where'd you go? Okay. Now, what that's going to look like is a lot like this file. So using the same kind of method to create a new component, I'm going to press this new file, and I'm going to create a new file called firebase.js. And notice that it's a lowercase Firebase instead of like an uppercase header. And that's because this isn't a React component, right? This is the first module or file in our project that isn't actually a React component. It's just plain JavaScript. So I am going to first import Firebase from Firebase app. And notice that it doesn't have like a dot backslash in front of Firebase. And that is telling our JavaScript that, hey, I need you to import this Firebase method or library from like the things that we've told Yarn that our project depends on, right? Versus something like this header component that in our thank you page, we're actually just importing it from this same file structure. So what you could think of when you're saying import whatever from this place is that this place would just be the directory of different libraries that you've installed through npm install or yarn add. So I know that my Firebase project is going to need analytics and Firestore, and using the convention from the Firebase documentation, which I'll put in the video description below. I'm going to include Firebase analytics, and I am going to import Firebase Firestore. And Firestore is what Firebase uses to let me have a NoSQL database. Now, talking about a NoSQL database could probably be a series of videos in and of itself, but we'll definitely cover that in the future. But for right now, I just want to get my simple application going. So I know that I need to initialize Firebase in my application using a configuration object. So I'm going to declare an object first using this const keyword. And the const keyword is basically could be like it's a sibling of the var keyword. But instead, what const lets us do is it lets us declare that this is an object or variable that it will never be changed again. And that's sort of really important distinction to make. So this Firebase config needs a whole bunch of data that I can get from my Firebase project. So I'm actually just going to continue just going to continue this sign up. It's telling me that I also need to install this Firebase Tools, and I definitely do. So I'm going to use a similar command in my project to yarn add, and it's similar because it's the same, but except I'm going to add a dash and a capital D for development and say that I need you to add, not Siri, I need you to add Firebase Tools to my development tools. And the reason that we're saying -D is because this is a JavaScript library that does not need to get included in our application or whatever it is that we're delivering to our customers. But we're going to be using it in a couple of minutes here to upload our Firebase. Now, Firebase kind of takes me through my project, through setting up my project. So because I used yarn, you can't just use Firebase directly. So I would have to say yarn Firebase, and I can use this because I installed that Firebase Tools just now. I can say yarn Firebase login. And this is going to, or it should open up a window on your browser to let you pick a Google account. It's really slick, real nice, real simple. But I'm already logged in with my account here. So now I can run a yarn Firebase init. And this is going to ask me a couple of questions. Basically, hey, what do you want to set up in your application? I know that I need Firestore, and I know that I'm going to need hosting. So I got there by pressing J and K for down and up, and you hit space to toggle your options. Once you've toggled the options you'd like, hit enter. I've already created this project, so I am going to choose the use an existing project option. Now I am going to look for my project, which is Sweatiest Oculus. There we go. Oh, I can't set up Firebase yet because I don't have my Firestore set up. So in my Firebase dashboard here, now that I've added my app, I just went through it all, but I couldn't run Firebase in it. I do need to go to the database option, and because this hasn't been configured yet, I need to click on create database. You might want to start it in test mode because it'll make your life a lot easier while you're developing. I generally like to start my databases in production mode because then I can be very declarative about the data that my users are allowed to change. So I'm just going to hit next. It's going to ask me what location I want. You might want a different location depending on where you are. I'm just going to go with US Central. Now it's provisioning an entire database for us. And by the way, Firebase is, so, what I'm currently doing is free, entirely free. Like, one of the things that you might ask yourself, like, why wouldn't I just use Squarespace or Wix to create a website? And you absolutely could. But all of those tools cost money because they are delivering a very valuable resource. So again, kind of what I'm showing you is how you could have the same thing for like maybe an hour or two of work. So now that we have our database set up, you could actually run that yarn Firebase init command again. I'm going to pick Firestore, I'm going to pick hosting, use an existing project. What file? Just hit enter to get the default option. What file should you use for file? Enter again. This is an important question. Now we're setting up our hosting for Firebase, and it's asking us, what do you want to use as your public directory? This might be a little confusing because if you remember what our project directory looks like, we already have this public folder here, this public directory that definitely has some files in it. But that's not actually the folder we want to use as our public directory. The folder that we want to use is called build. So I'm going to tell it this. So, it's asking me, what do you want to use as your public directory? I'm literally typing in the word build. And this directory doesn't exist yet, but it will in a couple of minutes. And now it's asking me if I want to configure as a single page app, which means rewrite every single call to my website to index.html. You might want that, and I do, because our project in React is, we're basically routing it ourselves. So I'm going to type Y and enter, and I have just completed my Firebase setup. So now that I've completed my Firebase setup, I do actually need to tell my project what it needs. So I'm clicking on the little gears, going over to project settings, and then under general and under your apps, find your Firebase SDK snippet, go to this config, and now copy all of the different key values in this Firebase config. Oh, they updated, nice. And I'm going to paste those values in my Firebase config. And now I'm going to initialize my Firebase application with my Firebase config. And now I'm going to export this, this instance of Firebase from this Firebase file. And the reason I'm doing that is because the Firebase instance that comes from this file has been initialized with this config versus the Firebase instance that comes from the library, which hasn't been initialized with my configuration. So what I can now do is go back to my application, app.js, and in this handle submit form, I could say that, all right, when you're submitting this, I need you to update or like upload this email that they've so graciously given us to, sorry, I'm saving a file, to Firebase. So I'm going to go to the very top of my file here, and I'm going to import Firebase from Firebase. Now that I've imported Firebase, I'm actually going to comment this out. This set did sign up to true because that's not actually true right now. The way that I do that in JavaScript is by putting 2 forwards backslashes in front of that. So what I actually need to do when my submit form is executed is say Firebase, Firestore. And again, this is one of those cool times where if I kind of want to know what I can do with Firestore or what it returns, I could, hover over that and it'll give me kind of an idea of all of the different things that I could do with Firestore. I'll also add all of the documentation to Firebase and Firestore, so you could definitely check that out yourself. But I know that I am going to use a collection, which I'm going to call email lead. And to that collection, I am going to add this email that I've collected. And this looks a little funky here because I'm literally just going to pass this email like this. This is an ES6 notation where instead of, what we're actually passing to this add method is just an object, right? And it could look whatever way you need it to look to get your data in Firebase. But instead of saying email equals email, JavaScript just lets me be less verbose and say send the email key. Then I also want to know when it was created, and I know that Firebase Firestore has a timestamp class that I can call, and let me see real quick. Yeah, timestamp now to get a server timestamp of when this was created. And now, without going too much into JavaScript, what add is actually doing is a JavaScript promise, which is a very important topic to understand. But what you should know is that once you've called a promise, you could then use the then keyword to denote what will happen after this function returns successfully. Like it sent this data to the server, and sometime in the future, the server sent us a message that said, hey, we got that information, it worked. So I'm going to say that, all right, do that, and after you send that data, if everything worked out well, then I want you to set did sign up to true. But if something goes wrong, I need you to catch that something went wrong. And instead, I'm going to use a built-in JavaScript method called alert. I'm going to just say something went wrong. Please try again. I'm doing this so that users don't sign up and think that they signed up, but they didn't really sign up yet. So I'm going to save my changes and go to my application. Now, this is still going to fail because I haven't told my database what kind of data or information I need to save. So I know that I'm using this email lead collection, right? So I'm going to go to my Firestore settings by going to database. Let me reload this real quick. So in my Firebase dashboard, I'm going to database, then I'm going to rules. This is an entire topic that you could also kind of go into. I'll definitely paste the docs in the description after this. But I'm basically saying that, all right, on this new email lead table, any document in that collection, I need you to allow read. I don't know if I have to pass if true, to be honest, but I'm just going to do that because it looks consistent. So I'm just saying that, all right, actually, it's not read, it's write. Yeah. All right, so what I'm basically saying is that, all right, for my collection, If you're trying to write to the email lead, then any document inside this collection, just allow somebody to write to it. But definitely don't let anybody read from it, right? This is our data. I want to keep it safe. I want to keep it secure. So what should now happen is that this same form, if I want to submit it, I can. It worked. And if I go back to my Firebase dashboard, and if I refresh my database tab, I can see that there's this email lead collection that I just created, and there's a new entry on it from this email, and it was created at this time UTC, which is awesome. That's like 80% of what I need. But the last problem that I have to solve here is that this doesn't live anywhere but my computer, right? So I'm going to open up a terminal again, go to my project, and now what I want to run is this yarn build command that actually Create React app created for us. I can execute it at any time. And what this yarn build command is doing is it's taking all of the different files that we've created, all of the different calls and states and all of that, and it's creating an optimized build that is 138 kilobytes big, which is kind of big because Firebase definitely adds a little bit of weight. But I think the average web page in 2020 is like about a meg. You want to keep these sizes small though, as small as possible, because you don't know where your users are, what kind of internet they have, and generally you'll get better SEO if your page loads very quickly. So once I've created this build, I can actually go back to VS Code, and I can see that this build directory was created. And it basically takes everything you had in public, and it kind of mixes it up with some of the stuff you had in SRC, and it creates this big old jumble mess of JavaScript you should never really have to look at, because I don't want to look at it right now. I don't think anybody wants to look at build files. But what I can do with that build directory is go back to my terminal. And now what I could say is yarn Firebase to use that command that we installed earlier. And I could do deploy. And right now I'm only interested in hosting. So I could say deploy only hosting. And that's going to take that build folder that we just created, and it's going to throw it up to the cloud on a server that we don't ever have to think about because Google is just handling it for us. They are making sure that our pages are being served. But now, if you or me or anybody else goes to the link that I just put in the chat, we see our application. It lives there, and I could put in an email. Click on Get Notified and go back to my database, and I can see that my email is there, and that if any of you do that, my email will also be there. So in summation, that's, I think we definitely went over the hour a little bit, but I hope that kind of got a little bit of an idea of the different tools that are available to you to very quickly, put your ideas together and throw them up on the web. Again, this page doesn't look very pretty, but just as a little showcase, I'm gonna use my personal website. I created all of this using the same technologies that we covered today, with a little bit of CSS and one extra library called Anime.js, which lets you do really cool animations. But yeah, basically all of this is the same kind of concepts that we just went over, except with a little bit of CSS, which we'll cover on the class next, or on the workshop next this Thursday, not next Thursday, this Thursday. But yeah, now I kind of want to open it up to open it up to the workshop audience. And I don't necessarily know how to do this. If somebody can do that. I'm going to unmute Tag by Choice.